Yep. Kum Lenin Ablat Gemara and After Gimel Amad Aleph. We're right in the middle of the sugya to do with Truma.
Good morning.
Morning. Right in the middle of the sugya to do with Truma, and coming to an end before we move on back to Yom Tov. So we're learning the last thing we learned was an argument in Debi and Abyeshi Yehuda. We know the rule is that when you chayiv with Truma and Maisus, when it's gemar, when it's digun, when it's all finished, completed, and usually it is when you have a pile and it's all smooth. And we had an argument in Debi and Abyeshi. If you bring it in with stalks, we said before you made a pile out of it, it's not really chayiv and truma meiser mehatera, so you can have a snack from it and so on. But we talked about if you bring in with the stalks and then you wriggle it in your hands and you take out the seeds. The Rebbe says, well, that is its completion, and therefore you're chayiv and truma meiser. The Rebbe says no, that you are potter because only if it's final product. Okay, so we're up to the Gemara here. We are up to Amar Abaya, about 7 lines on top of Yud Gimel Amar Aleph. Amar Abaya says, Machleke is this argument between Rebbe and Abiyasi is only referring to Bishvil when they're in stocks. And that's when Abiyasi says you are potter because most of them use it for threshing. And therefore the goydin is only when you piled it up and you decided to take a stalk out and eat the seed directly. It's not completed. You never chayiv true ma'ases mahater. Avol bikitnius, when it comes to legumes, there's quite a few people that they don't just pile it up, but they bring it in as you need it per meal. So therefore, by that completion is not when you pile it up out in a large pile, but rather divrei hakol asurai. So when you tie it up, tivla. But that's the completion of the job, and therefore now it's labeled tevel from the Torah. Tevel means toivloi, it's not good, it's not complete, and you have to now complete it by giving truma, meises, and so on and so forth. So Abaye said that Rabbi Yehuda, according to this version at least, concedes that those things which is common to complete the job without piling it up, then that is considered is gemar malach. Says the Gemara, layman's say being approved. You have bundles of fenugreek, which is a kind of a legume, and they put only a little bit for basically for spice. It's not really for eating, it's more for giving taste. Shall tevel, if it's tevel, what do? Is you crush it. Because when you crush it, that's how you thresh. That's like threshing, equivalent of threshing by weight. So you crush it, and then you take a rough assessment. So you have to give truma, whatever the 2%, whatever it is. So you take a rough assessment in your mind. So what do you think? How many seeds are there? And then you separate and you separate then truma. And you base it against the seeds, but you don't have to base it against the actual twig itself that's there as well. Even though the twig itself, it's not just the leaves that have, or the the seeds that have this taste. The actual branch itself is also, little stalk, also has taste. Nevertheless, you don't have to give maisa. It's only the what do you call it? The tablet itself, the seeds itself. Now, my lab, who's the author of this? And in other words, you have to give Truma Meiser on seeds. Who's the author of this? That's Rabbi Yesi Bar Yehudi. This sounds like Rabbi Yesi Bar Yehudi because this is something you don't normally pile up in big amounts, big quantities. It's something that, you have little herbs and you do in small amounts. And yet it says you chayiv Truma Meiser. That means he admits certain things. If it's small, if you normally eat in small amounts, that is completion of work and you're chayiv Truma Meiser. The Amar Hasim is over there, loy tabla. Generally speaking, it's not considered tabla by stalks with seeds, but hacha in this case, of the case of the tilson, because you don't eat it at all, it's only a spice, and this is how you normally do it, a little bit at a time. Tivla. He agrees that it's tabla. So that's Abaye's proof. Says the Gemara, that's the proof they want to bring to Abaye. Says the Gemara, loy. There's no proof. Perhaps a Debbie. Maybe the author of this is Rebbe. Maybe he'll hold in all cases. Maybe he holds, for whatever reason, the only time you're chayiv truma ma'aser matorah is if you pile it high. And even though it's common to eat it in small quantity, it doesn't matter. The fact he didn't pile it. How do you know what Rabbi Yehuda will concede this point? So, and maybe the author of this is Rebbe. So if it's Rebbe, then why just limit it to a case of something we eat a little bit of time? Say, eat Rebbe, you might eat it till, so why talk about fenugreek? I'm talking even about stalks, so people eat it, not just for taste. People eat it, and still, Rebbe holds that it's, as soon as you bring in the house, if you bring in a stalk at a time, you take out the seeds, you chayiv truma. Isn't that a bigger chiddush than kidneys? Yeah. But even something that sometimes you pile high and sometimes you don't, and yet you don't have, if you don't, you still chayiv truma, so you bring it in the house. Someone said, okay, so someone retorts. So what do you want to argue? So, and they were talking about these spices, liashmina. Why then highlight only tilson, only this particular herb? Lishamina, sharmina, kidneys. Talk about all other kidneys. That what that it becomes tevel and spices. All spices. Even though occasionally, not always, but occasionally people pile it up. Occasionally, people bring in the house and only do a little bit at a time, and tell us that over there. Also, if you're from those people that bring a little bit at a time, as soon as you bring in the house, that is your complete gemar malacha. You're complete and you have your ma'aser. And then I'll know for surely in the case of fenugreek that everybody generally does it only a little bit of time, and you put really only a little bit of time in the pot. You don't eat it at all. It's just purely for taste. Talk about other legumes where people eat it as well, and then talk about that, and we'll know for sure. Tilson, the same thing is, because that's how everyone does. You bring a little bit at a time, and that's it. So you want to know, Itzichle, there is a chiddush involved here by Tilson. Salke Daf, I would have thought the chiddush here is not that Rabbi Yosef Yehuda admits. We can say supported by it, but the chiddush is not that Rabbi Yosef Yehuda admits that you chayiv over here truma. Because that's the completion. Then you could talk about all kidneys, where very often people bring in, a little quantities at a time. You know what the chiddush of tilson is? That even though the branch itself, the actual stalk, is also tasty, you can also use it for fragrance, yet you don't have to give truma on that. That's the chiddush. I would have thought hoiled with tam eight, so you'd pretty sure that the taste of the eight, the branch, and its leaves and is the same. Leaf fresh namia eight, and maybe you have to give truma on the eights as well, because people put that in also for taste. You don't have to. So therefore, Abaya holds over here. Then in this case, if you concedes that since it's common for people to bring in all very small quantities, when you bring it in for to be a spice or herb, that then becomes the completion. That's one version. Ikidami is another version. Amrabai, exactly the opposite. The other version is that when does the Rebbe say Yechaye Machlekes b'shibolim by stalks? Since many people bring it in to take the seeds out and to eat it or toast it, so therefore, if that's what you do, then that becomes the complete work, and you're chayi for bringing a stalk with the seeds. But when it comes to legumes, he said the kidney is divid hakel. Everyone agrees. Asuraisa, just tying it up, loy tiblet is not tevel, because generally he says when you bring it even your kidney, when your legumes, they also pile it up, and therefore if you don't pile it up, you just bring one at a time. Even Rebbe says, well, there's no truma here. Makes will ask you a question from this place that we just brought a proof. Now we're going to ask a question. It says, there's a koytage, you crush it, and you assess how many seeds, and then you separate truma based on the number of seeds. We don't include the actual branch itself. We're talking about truma. So we see from here that what? Clearly here, spices, herbs, it's completed when you bring in the house. Even though you only brought a few single stalks, it's completed. So this is, someone has to be the author of this, and must be at least Rebbe. How can I say that everyone agrees in these cases there is no truma, there's no tevel? And we're assuming now when we say tevel means that you didn't give all the tithes that you have to give. So we're assuming tevel means also you didn't give truma. So you must say, no. Tevel, tovel, shel trumas, meiser. No, there is Abaye. The second version of Abaye will say there is no truma here, truma at all, because you never was completed. And when we say tevel, we don't mean that it's incomplete because you didn't give truma. We mean that if the Levi, who's supposed to take his meiser, his 10% after the Kohen takes his 2%, if the Levi jumps in ahead and takes in his 10% first, so in a way, really, he's stealing from the Kohen as well, because the Kohen now is losing out the 2% of that amount that he just took. But if the Levi jumped in ahead, took the Meiser first, the Torah says in the end of Parashat Korach, the Levi himself has to give Truma from his Meiser. And that Truma is the Levi, once he takes, he conferred upon this food that it has a status now of food and Tevel, because once he called it Meiser, now there's a Chiv of Truma. That's the case of Truma over here. But generally speaking, if the Levi wouldn't have jumped in, there's no Chiv of Truma whatsoever. So Tomer ben Levi was talking Rabbavu Mashim Lakish. This is like Rabbavu's name Mashim Lakish. That the Amar Rabbavu Mashim Lakish Maas edition. Shehigdimu b'shibolin. This Levi jumped in ahead while it was still growing in the stalks, and he took his 10% from this crop. Then that 10% automatically, he just conferred upon it the status of tevel. The Levi cannot eat it until he gives his own truma from it to the kohen. And therefore, in this case, the Levi is the one, because he was able to put the name of Meiser on it, the name of Truma, his Truma is on top of that as well. That he has to give his, and if he doesn't, he's Chai Misa, just like a Yisrael doesn't. Says the Gemara, and therefore he's not allowed to eat even a temporary meal. He's Chai Misa if he eats it, because he first has to give to the Kohen. Says the Gemara, Koitish, Koitish, Lamali. So the Gemara asks a question. If we're talking about Ben Levi, we said before that he has to first crush it. In other words, he has to complete it and then he has to give it truma. If it's a Levi who took it, not the original owner, why do we tell him that he has to crush it? It said before that if you by the tilson, it says you have to crush it and then you work out the seeds. Why does he have to crush it? So the Gemara, in other words, by telling him crushing it means we're telling him finish the product, turn it into dogon, just like by wheat. You have to, if you finish the process and turn it into wheat. So the same thing over here, we tell them finish the process, crush it. Why? So, but if you're the original owner, it makes sense. It says so you have to complete it. But you are only a Levi. Why you have to kaitish? Says let us say just like I took it when it's still a stalk. I'm going to give you a stalk. Just tell the kohen, I'm going to give you a truma, but as stalks, and you do whatever you have to do to complete the job. Why are we telling the Levi, who's not really the owner, go ahead and crush it and finish the job? Says you know why kanasa? It's a penalty. Why did he jump in to the stalks? Because in a way, first he didn't follow the order of the Torah, and also you in a way you're stealing from the kohen. So and in a way you took a little bit extra for yourself as well, because 10% of a whole field is more than 10% of a field after you remove the 2% that goes to the kohen. So therefore, as a penalty, go ahead and crush it. What was the time we learned Ben Levi so Ben Levi that took stalks when it was still stalks. As Maisa Oisa good, and he has to complete the job. Another if he took grapes, he says, and he has to convert it into wine. Zaysim olives, and he has to complete it and turn it into oil. So that's when you give to a kohen, the truma has to be completed. So the Levi now has to take over and do that. He gets to his ma'aser, the kohen gets to the kohen, and then we could say, shame, and tell us, just like truma gedola, if a Yisrael has a crop, he has to give 2% to the 3 different levels. Depends if you're very generous, average, or if you're very, stingy. And so the same thing over here. So Ella, it's a 40th, a 50th, or a 60th. Ella min hagoyde umin hayekef. He has to, just like we have to give truma gedola. You don't give only from what's piled up and from the wine, from the vat. It's all complete. It's in the vat already. You have the wine, or you have the oil, and so on. Kach trumas ma'aser. So to the Levi, when he gives his truma to the kohen, ein and tell us you don't give ela min hagoyde when hayekef. The wheat has to be ready, taken care of, has to be completed. The same thing with the wine. Says the Gemara, if we're talking about the Levi, that's what you wanted to say. We're talking about a Levi, and that's why by him it is tevel. It's not a question of bayi. Let me ask a question. So mechashev, how can you just take a rough estimate? Because if we're talking about the Yisrael, a Yisrael is allowed to give a rough estimate. Doesn't have to physically count every stalk he has and give exactly the amount. Because according to the Torah, there's no amount that you have to give by truma. The Chachamim put down these different amounts. So therefore, depends if you're not, if you're very generous, average, or stingy. So therefore, you know what? To make it easier, we allow you to make a rough assessment. Because even if you end up giving 1 kernel of wheat, that's a sufficient mahatayda for an entire field. But by Levi, the Torah clearly says you have to give ma'aser min ma'aser. So you have to measure. You have to give 10% to the kohen. So the Levi has to give from his ma'aser min ma'aser, give 10% to the kohen. So he has to physically measure it. So how can the Bryce say mechashev? He takes an assessment. Hamani says, it's not a problem. Because there is one opinion that says that even the Levi can take an assessment, and that's also this Bryce. Who is that? Abelazar ben Gimel. The time we learned, Abelazar ben Gimel, but it says in the Pasuk, the Nechashev lochem, it says in Keidach Nechashev lochem trumaschem, you should consider your truma kadogon, like the wheat, minagoidem, like the wheat from the pile, like it's fully ripe from the wine. So he says in the Pasuk, the Nechashev lochem trumaschem, in plural. There's only one truma. What do you mean 2 trumas? B'shtei truma, 2 kinds of trumas. Achas truma. One is if talking about Yisrael gives to a kohen, and therefore v'nechshav is sufficient, an assessment. V'achas trumas ma'aser, and the other one is you're giving the Levi who gives truma from his ma'aser also v'nechshav is sufficient. And kishem shetruma gdoila, you tell us ba'omer machshava, you make an assessment, and machshava, you just think, and in mind you say this corner is going to be the truma, and that confers on that section of the crop the status of truma. Kach truma ma'aser, same thing applies to a Levi when he gives his truma to a kohen. You can use an assessment, and also you just have to think, and that becomes already, you just have to look on one corner of the field and say that's going to be the section that's going to be truma, and then that's it, that's truma. Gufa, let's analyze this. So we had two versions of Abai. Gufa, let's analyze them. If a Levi jumps into the field and takes his ma'aser first from the stalks, somebody it suddenly you just now made a tevel that you just conferred tevel on these stalks. As far as the Levi is concerned, he has to give now his truma to the kohen. Now, my time at why since when you took the 10%, it did become ma'aser. And the Torah clearly says, once you have ma'aser, once you Levi took ma'aser, then the Torah says, but you now have to give ma'aser and a ma'aser. So therefore, once you call ma'aser, then you have to give your truma to the kohen. Says the Gemara, another din. Ma'aser rishon shekdim shebol. If a Levi jumps in the field and he takes his ma'aser from the stalks, potter metruma gedola. Now the kohen loses out 2% on that crop. The Levi does not have to reimburse the kohen. It just found. It's too late. Nothing you can do about it. The kohen loses out. All the Yisrael has to do is give his normal truma from the remainder of the field. He doesn't have to include in his calculation the 10% of the Levi already seized. The only thing that once the Levi takes his 10%, the only thing he has to give is his 10% from that to the kohen. But anything that was missed out on before, you don't have to give. You don't give truma from that 10%. If the kohen missed out because the Levi jumped ahead while it stalks, it's too late. You don't give it back. You don't get it back. And So Papa asked the a question. So I feel like giving Kerinami. So he asked the question. So even why only when it's stalks? So let's say it's piled up already. You have a chiv truma, but the Levi jumped in and took his ma'aser first. Same thing. The din should be that the Levi does not have to give the truma out of the 10% he just took. Papa said, Abai said to him, regarding that, the pasuk says in the pasuk, Mikol, from all your matamas, you have to give truma. What do you mean all? Including once it's piled up and you took 10%, you have to give truma to the kohen. Can't take away from the kohen his 2%. Terima is entitled in this there. Teruma is called Teruma Hashem. Umari, so the Pops, I don't understand. Why did you decide to include if the Levi's stole from the stalks is exempt? And why, if it's piled up, the Levi's not exempt, has to give the kohen share as well, his original share that the Yisrael owed him. What's the difference? Umari, he said, Hi idgin b'hai lo idgin. Very simple. Here it's already completed. Once it's completed, the truma is already called truma. You already have a chiv to the kohen. Here it's incomplete. Tanas, we learned talking about truma ma'aser. We learned over there. Hamekalev sa'id, and somebody peels barley. Mekalev achas. What you do is you peel one at a time. You want to eat them raw, not cooking or anything else. You just want to eat barley seeds. So what you do is you peel one at a time. But you could eat it as you pot it from mice and all that, because this is called a snack. It's not the normal way of eating. Normally you cook it, so on and so forth. And therefore, we're not talking about it's piled up. It wasn't piled up or anything. And you went over while it's still in the stalk, in the form of a stalk, and you peeled it and you ate some. The im kolaf, that's no, you take directly from the stalk into your mouth. But the im kolaf v'nosan l'techyod, if you peel and then you pile it up in your hand, then that's like piling up. And now you are chayiv in giving ma'aser, because that's considered already the way you're preparing it. That's considered like a keva. The same thing applies to Shabbos. If you take one barley at a time, we're talking about where the stalks were not connected to the ground, where they were already, harvested. They're just lying there in the form of a stalk. So Shabbos is the same thing. If you take one barley at a time, then it's not considered mefarik, which is a tool of threshing, because that's the normal way of eating it. Because it's not, when you want to take, it's not the normal way of taking off out the barley from the stalks. Not one at a time. But if you gather them together in your hand and you take a pile, that's the normal way of doing it. That's also on Shabbos, because that's mefarik, which is the tool of dash. But if you take one barley at a time, it's called a tzoshinu. It's kalachiyad, and you're allowed to. So anything not so a Rab mekalfalet vise. His wife used to peel kase cupfuls and cupfuls. Chia, Rav's uncle, mekalfalet visu. His wife would peel kase cupfuls. And Ella eat. If you want, I'll tell you this comparison to Shabbos, or this contrast to Shabbos, is a safe itma regarding the next din. What's the next din? If somebody goes ahead and in his hand he breaks off, he wiggles in his hand, and he takes pieces of wheat, menafeyach al yad. So what you do is you take only a little bit at a time and you blow so that you separate the seed, the wheat kernels from the rest. And you do eat. That's no way of eating. But if you blow and you put it inside your pocket, then chayiv. Then that's chayiv, because that makes it like a meal. That's a normal way of doing it. Piling up, you chayiv truma ma'aser. Rabbi Elazar, and that Rabbi Elazar says v'chein l'Shabbos. The same thing applies to Shabbos. That if you do and put in your pocket, you're chayiv on Shabbos. Maskel Rabba b'mamol v'reishel l'ma'aser in l'Shabbos loy. So in the first case, you're telling me you only. If you by the case of barley, if you put it in a cup, you're telling me that you, as far as mice is concerned, it's considered like a pile, and for Yechayim mice. But as far as Shabbos is concerned, it's all right. How can that be? That Shabbos you tell me, as far as Shabbos is concerned, it's considered you didn't complete the work, and yet, right? Because you're saying that Rav Chia is a wife, Rav's wife piled it up in a cup. But when it comes to mice, you tell me it is considered complete. How can that be? Why not? I'll show you a number of differences between Maisa, what's considered complete, and Shabbos, what's considered complete. For example, let's say things which we normally classify as a goyer, as complete. As far as Maisa is concerned, you're not allowed to even have a snack, and yet a Shabbos is allowed to do. Now we learn Ezo Gornon Maisa. What's considered Maisa? Kishuyin Vadluyin. When it comes to these melons and cucumbers, Misha when it becomes considered complete as far as Maisa is concerned, is when we talk about each particular fruit. When is it considered complete? And now you say Yechayv Maisa. Misha means when the blossom on top of the fruit falls off, like an apple has a little crown, and if it dries, it falls off. And if let's say you, before you fell off, you decide to make a pile from them. So then is Mishiyamid. When you make a pile, either you make a pile, or if you didn't make a pile, when the fruit is complete, if the crown falls off. And Tana Nami, we also learned Gabi B'Tzalim. We also learned, and so this is called Gemar Malach as far as Meiser is concerned. But what we learn by onions, Mishiyamid Aramba, and by onions as well when you make a pile. When it comes to Shabbos, if you bring, let's say, onions to the house and pile it up, it's not considered a malacha. So we see that the Gemar malacha was considered by Meiser has nothing to do with Shabbos. So what's this contrast or comparison? You say the rule is by Shabbos you need that, even though as far as Meiser is concerned, it's considered complete. When it comes to Shabbos, it's not complete, and the reason is because Shabbos requires Meleches Machshavas. Now, the word Meleches Machshavas seems to be used in many. We're going to learn Chagiga what Meleches Machshavas is, but the word Meleches Machshavas normally means that it has to be a Chashem Melech, or you have to think about what you're doing. If it happened by itself inadvertently, it's not considered Meleches Machshavas. Here we're translating Meleches Machshavas. It has to be Chashem. It has to be like a skilled operation. It has to be Chashem. Like Rashi says, Meleches Umnes. Because we compare it to the Mishkan, and all the malachas of the Mishkan was skilled, I guess required skills. So therefore, Melech Mashab means a chashem, is asatayda hachanam Melech asatayda. So here too also it has to be a Melech Machshavas with a Teda Asa. That's when it comes to pile. That's not really considered a chashuv thing at all. But what we're talking about before, about taking the seeds out, that requires already some skill. So that's why we compare it to Shabbos. Says Gemara further, let's just finish the Mishnah. Kate said, Moil, you said before, you're allowed to be Moil because it's not the normal way. It's a shini. What's considered Moil and Yom Tov? You know, if you're rolling it in your hand, that to take out the seeds, that's considered a shini. So the Gemara said, what's a shini? You do one finger, let's say, between your thumb and your index finger, and you twirl it in your hand there until it comes off. That's not the normal way of doing it. Rabbi Avi said the same Rabbi Yosef says even the thumb against two fingers. It's not the normal way. Normal way is you put it between two hands and you rub it against each other. So put one finger or your thumb between two fingers and then you roll it against the two fingers. That's not the normal way. Rav Amar Kivan the Mishani. Since you made a change, I feel a choda kulit. The thumb against all four fingers. Nami is also considered a shinik. You're not using both hands. Kate said, we said before. Then what you do is you blow from hand to hand, and that's how you separate the seed from, let's say, from the particle you don't want. How do you do that? Make a shini. No, don't put it in the palm of your hand. Do it on your fingers, and you blow your fingers. That's not the normal way. So you said the fingers, the laughter, the mishani. Once you make a shini, I feel you can use. In other words, the way you normally do is two hands. So since you made a shini by using one hand, that in itself is sufficient change. You're right. You can use an entire hand, including your palm, and you can use that to separate the seeds, and that is all right because since you're not using both hands, it's very considered a shini. You can do that on Yom Tov. Okay, so tomorrow we go back to the laws of Yom Tov, and the arguments between Shammai and Hill continue. Okay, have a good day, everybody. See you.